It can be easy to look at certain people and assume they simply do not need anyone. They seem fiercely independent, emotionally distant, and almost untouched by relationships. Maybe you have cared deeply about someone like this, or perhaps you recognize some of these tendencies within yourself. From the outside, they can appear remarkably composed when others would be falling apart. They walk away without showing much emotion, keep people at a careful distance, and act as though nothing could ever truly affect them. But that distance does not necessarily mean they feel less. Sometimes it means they have learned to feel deeply while keeping those emotions hidden. Once you understand that distinction, avoidant behavior begins to look very different. Behind the silence, the emotional shutdowns, and the constant desire for space may be someone who cares far more about connection than they are comfortable admitting. And for certain people, forming a genuinely deep emotional bond is extremely rare. When that kind of connection finally happens, it can leave a lasting impression. There is often a moment when the carefully constructed defenses begin to weaken, when emotional control becomes harder to maintain, and when genuine feelings start breaking through. Most people never get to see that side of an avoidant person. They encounter the guarded exterior, the version that keeps everyone at a safe emotional distance. But the few people who manage to create a sense of genuine safety can sometimes become deeply significant. Once an avoidant allows someone beyond those protective barriers, that experience can remain meaningful long after the relationship changes. One of the strongest beliefs an avoidant may carry is the idea that needing others is a weakness. They may tell themselves, "I can handle everything on my own." On the surface, that sounds confident and powerful, but underneath it can be a deeply learned strategy for avoiding vulnerability. Many people with avoidant tendencies come to associate dependence with disappointment, emotional exposure with pain, and closeness with losing control. If you have ever tried to build a relationship with someone like this, you may know how confusing that can feel. You can spend hours beside them, talk about countless subjects, and still sense that there is an emotional room inside them you are not allowed to enter. Their independence may look like confidence, but sometimes it is protection. It can develop from earlier experiences in which emotional needs were ignored, trust was unreliable, or closeness never felt consistently safe. Eventually, the person learns a simple rule: depending on someone creates risk. That lesson can quietly follow them into adulthood, influencing the way they handle conflict, intimacy, commitment, affection, and even emotional expression. Yet no matter how strongly someone insists that they are better off alone, human beings remain wired for connection. Attachment needs do not simply disappear because someone has learned to hide them. Whether a person leans anxious, avoidant, or secure, the desire to feel understood and emotionally connected can still exist underneath the defenses. An avoidant person may simply have difficulty recognizing, expressing, or trusting that desire. Watch what happens when emotional intensity begins increasing. They may seem perfectly comfortable until a conversation becomes deeply personal. Feelings can make them uncomfortable. Greater intimacy can suddenly create distance. When commitment becomes more serious, they may start asking for more space. From the outside, those reactions can easily be mistaken for indifference. But sometimes fear is driving the withdrawal rather than a lack of feeling. Being completely known can feel dangerous when someone has learned that vulnerability comes with consequences. The contradiction is that they can genuinely want affection, understanding, and emotional security while simultaneously becoming uncomfortable when those things are actually offered. When closeness remains hypothetical, it can feel safe. Once it becomes real, their protective system may become activated. Love requires openness, and openness creates the possibility of rejection, disappointment, abandonment, or emotional pain. So instead of instinctively moving closer, they may create distance. They strengthen the walls and convince themselves that those walls represent emotional strength. From the outside, it can look as though they have mastered solitude. Internally, however, there may still be a powerful desire to belong, to be understood, and to experience a relationship where they do not have to constantly protect themselves. The idea that avoidant people are incapable of deep love is therefore far too simplistic. They can care deeply. Their challenge is often learning how to remain present when those feelings become intense. If you have ever been close to someone with avoidant tendencies, you may have experienced this contradiction firsthand. One day they can be warm, playful, attentive, and surprisingly open. They may share personal thoughts, laugh freely, and allow you to see a softer side that few people encounter. Then, seemingly without explanation, their behavior changes. They become quieter, less expressive, more distant. It can leave you wondering whether the connection you experienced before was ever genuine. But emotional openness does not automatically become fake simply because withdrawal follows it. Those moments of closeness may have been completely authentic. The retreat may have reflected their difficulty tolerating the vulnerability that came with that closeness. In other words, they may not have pulled away because they suddenly stopped caring. They may have pulled away because caring had become emotionally overwhelming. For years, some avoidant people try to convince themselves that they do not need emotional intimacy at all. Instead of confronting loneliness, they may immerse themselves in work, hobbies, responsibilities, ambitions, entertainment, or constant activity. They fill their schedules so completely that there is little room left for uncomfortable emotions to surface. Productivity becomes a distraction. Independence becomes an identity. Being busy becomes a way of avoiding the quiet questions they do not want to answer. They might sincerely believe they are completely content alone, yet when life becomes quiet and distractions disappear, feelings that were buried beneath the surface can become harder to ignore. The people closest to them may sense that hidden emptiness even when the avoidant never puts it into words. And then, sometimes, someone enters their life who feels different. Not someone who pressures them into opening up, not someone who constantly demands reassurance, not someone who tries to force emotional closeness before they are ready. Instead, this person is steady, respectful, patient, and emotionally consistent. Their presence does not feel like another demand. It feels safe, and that difference can slowly change the way intimacy is experienced. For perhaps the first time in a long time, emotional connection does not feel like a threat that needs to be escaped. It feels peaceful. It feels manageable. It feels like something they can actually experience without losing themselves. Because that kind of emotional safety can be so unfamiliar, the person who provides it may become unusually memorable. Even if the avoidant never openly explains how significant the relationship was, that does not automatically mean the experience left no impact. People can move forward while still remembering the person who showed them that vulnerability did not have to mean losing control. The connection may change, the circumstances may change, and the relationship may eventually end, but the emotional lesson can remain. Sometimes the person who made them feel safe enough to lower their defenses becomes the person they remember precisely because, for a brief moment, they did not have to hide. That is why seeing avoidant people as nothing more than detached, independent loners misses an important part of the picture. Their independence may be less about having no emotional needs and more about becoming the identity that once helped them feel protected. Beneath that carefully maintained self-reliance is the same human desire we all carry, to feel loved, understood, accepted, and emotionally safe with someone. After years of believing that depending on others creates danger, opening their heart can feel like violating a rule they have followed for most of their life. And that is precisely what can make their genuine connections so significant. When someone who has spent years convincing themselves that they need nobody finally allows another person into their private emotional world, even in small ways, the experience can carry enormous meaning. It required them to move beyond a defense system they trusted for a very long time. So when someone suddenly becomes distant, closes themselves off, or seems impossible to reach emotionally, it is worth remembering that distance does not automatically equal rejection. Sometimes distance is protection. It can come from fear of vulnerability, fear of disappointment, fear of becoming dependent, or fear of losing someone after finally allowing them to matter. Understanding that distinction can completely change how you interpret their behavior. Instead of automatically seeing every retreat as evidence that they never cared, you can recognize that fear may be operating underneath the calm exterior. You stop reacting only to the withdrawal and begin seeing the emotional pattern beneath it. You replace constant pressure with emotional awareness. But understanding someone does not mean becoming responsible for fixing them. Avoidant people do not need another person to rescue them or carry their healing. What they need when they are willing to grow are experiences that gradually teach them that closeness does not always end in pain, that emotional dependence does not automatically lead to loss, and that allowing someone to matter is not a weakness. The protective armor may look like extreme independence, but underneath it is a very human longing to belong, to be accepted, and to be fully known without having to constantly protect themselves. Many people never get beyond the guarded exterior. You can spend a significant amount of time with someone and still feel as though a locked door remains between you. You may start questioning yourself and wondering whether you are somehow not enough to make them open up. But their emotional distance is not a reliable measurement of your worth. Often, it reflects an old belief that closeness comes with danger. And yet, there are situations where something begins to change. An avoidant person can encounter someone whose presence does not intensify the fear, but instead creates a sense of emotional safety. It is not because this person chases harder, gives endlessly, or somehow discovers a secret technique for breaking through the walls. In many cases, it is because they bring something different: steadiness instead of chaos, consistency instead of unpredictability, and respect instead of pressure. That environment can make emotional closeness feel less threatening. They are not forcing the avoidant to open up. They are simply demonstrating through consistent behavior that connection does not have to mean losing control. Imagine someone who has repeatedly been hurt by something they once trusted. Eventually, even the possibility of getting close to that experience can create fear. Then one day, they encounter something similar that does not hurt them. Slowly they learn that not every experience will end the same way. That is what emotional safety can represent for an avoidant person. It does not erase years of conditioning in an instant. It does not magically remove every defense. Instead, it gives their nervous system repeated experiences that contradict the old expectation. There is no demand to open up immediately. There is no emotional chaos they have to escape. There is affection without overwhelming pressure, and honesty without constant conflict. Over time, that consistency can make the emotional walls less necessary. Interestingly, people who care deeply about an avoidant can sometimes respond in ways that unintentionally strengthen the very defenses they are trying to overcome. When someone feels distance, their instinct may be to pursue harder, ask for repeated reassurance, demand explanations, or desperately try to restore the closeness they once had. That reaction is understandable. When you care about someone, uncertainty can make you want to reach toward them even more. But excessive pressure can reinforce an avoidant person's existing belief that intimacy is overwhelming. The person who creates genuine safety responds differently. They remain grounded instead of becoming consumed by the push and pull cycle. They can care deeply without demanding immediate emotional proof. They respect space without using silence as punishment. They remain present without trying to control the other person's emotional process. For the avoidant, that can feel surprisingly different. Instead of feeling trapped by someone's expectations, they experience room to approach connection at a pace they can actually tolerate. This does not mean overlooking unhealthy behavior or pretending that emotional withdrawal does not hurt. Healthy understanding still requires boundaries. The goal is not to tolerate everything simply because you understand where the behavior came from. It is about remaining authentic while respecting yourself and the other person. The message becomes simple. I care about you, but I will not chase you into emotional closeness, and I will not abandon myself to keep you comfortable. That combination of emotional steadiness and healthy boundaries can create a very different relationship environment. And when change begins, it is usually subtle rather than dramatic. The walls rarely disappear overnight. Instead, they may lower gradually, one small piece at a time. Perhaps they begin sharing more about their day. Perhaps they become more playful and relaxed around you. Maybe they initiate a conversation they normally would have avoided. They might reveal something personal without immediately pulling away afterward. These moments can appear insignificant from the outside, but they may represent meaningful movement for someone who has learned to protect themselves through emotional distance. If you are creating a safer dynamic, you may not even realize how significant those small changes are. Avoidant people often do not announce, "I'm beginning to trust you." Their behavior communicates it indirectly. Their expression becomes less guarded. Their warmth becomes more consistent. They stay present during conversations that once would have made them uncomfortable. The emotional distance gradually becomes less rigid. None of this is effortless for them. Their old instincts may still tell them to retreat whenever vulnerability becomes intense. Opening up can feel like exposing parts of themselves they spent years protecting. It challenges beliefs they once considered necessary for survival. Yet sometimes, despite those instincts, they choose to remain present. Not because their avoidant tendencies have suddenly disappeared, but because the relationship has become meaningful enough for them to consider taking an emotional risk. And that is one reason these deeper connections can be so difficult to create. You can be kind, patient, understanding, and genuinely caring, yet you still cannot force another person to open a door they are not ready to unlock. Their willingness to do that work has to come from them. It is not simply a matter of how much effort someone puts into a relationship. For an avoidant person, emotional safety can matter just as much. What makes the difference is whether being around you helps their nervous system settle or causes it to become more guarded. When they encounter someone who feels steady and emotionally safe, they often recognize the difference even if they cannot explain it. At first, they may still resist the connection. They might move closer and then suddenly create distance only to return again later. From the outside, those mixed signals can look like manipulation or a lack of interest, but sometimes they are expressions of an internal struggle. They may be silently asking themselves, "Can I trust this person? Is this connection actually safe? What happens if I let myself get close? And if I step back, will this person respond with pressure, anger, or abandonment?" When the response they receive is calm consistency rather than panic or relentless pursuit, something important can begin changing inside them. Slowly they learn that emotional safety can exist within closeness. This does not mean they suddenly become flawless partners. Old fears can still return. They may still need personal space. They may still struggle to communicate during emotionally intense moments. But an important belief has started to change. They begin discovering that being close to someone does not require giving up their independence. They experience affection without emotional chaos. They learn that intimacy does not automatically have to end in disappointment. Once someone has genuinely experienced that kind of safety, it can become an important reference point in how they understand relationships. The transformation is rarely created by dramatic declarations or huge romantic gestures. More often, it develops through ordinary moments repeated consistently. It comes from someone who can remain present without becoming controlling, offer affection without becoming possessive, and communicate honestly without turning every difficult emotion into a crisis. When an avoidant encounters that kind of emotional balance, their understanding of relationships can slowly begin to shift. They may stop seeing closeness as something they must constantly escape. Many people assume that someone with avoidant tendencies will always choose distance, but human beings are capable of learning new ways of relating. With enough safety, awareness, and willingness to grow, even deeply ingrained patterns can change. When an avoidant genuinely forms a strong bond, the relationship can carry significant emotional weight precisely because vulnerability has never come easily to them. They are not accustomed to handing someone access to their private emotional world. Their distance may have been built over many years as a form of protection. So allowing another person through those defenses can represent a major emotional risk. That is why genuine trust may mean far more to them than outsiders realize. People sometimes assume avoidant individuals move on effortlessly because they can physically leave or become emotionally quiet. But outward distance does not tell you everything happening internally. A person can step away from a relationship while still carrying meaningful memories of the connection. That does not necessarily mean obsession or an inability to move forward. It can simply mean that an emotionally significant experience became part of their personal history. Once someone has experienced a relationship where vulnerability felt safer than expected, that experience can influence how they understand closeness in the future. What makes such a bond meaningful is not simply attraction or convenience. It is the sense of relief that can come from no longer feeling like every emotional connection has to be defended against. An avoidant may go on to meet other people and experience new relationships, but a connection that taught them something important about emotional safety can remain uniquely significant. They may never directly tell you just how much your presence affected them. They may not have the words, the confidence, or even the emotional awareness to explain what the relationship meant. Their actions may not always make the impact obvious. Yet somewhere beneath the defenses, they can recognize the people who made them feel emotionally safe. They can remember the experiences that challenged their old beliefs about love. And when a connection genuinely changes how someone understands intimacy, that experience can become part of their emotional history in a way that is difficult to simply erase. This is one reason avoidant attachment is so often misunderstood. Their love does not always look dramatic or obvious. It may not come through constant reassurance, extravagant gestures, or openly expressed emotion. Sometimes it appears quietly through trust, consistency, small moments of vulnerability, and the willingness to remain present when their instincts tell them to retreat. And when that connection is genuine, it can become deeply meaningful. The difficult part is that most people never get to witness this side of an avoidant person. That is not necessarily because they are incapable of loving or because others are somehow unworthy. Often their own defenses prevent them from allowing most people close enough to see what exists underneath. Many relationships remain at the surface because emotional trust never develops far enough for those deeper layers to appear. So if you once loved someone with avoidant tendencies and never experienced the emotional openness you hoped for, be careful about turning that outcome into a judgment about yourself. Their inability to open up does not automatically mean you were not valuable enough. It may simply reflect the fears and protective patterns they have carried for years. Someone who has learned to expect disappointment may enter relationships already preparing for things to go wrong. They may believe that relying on another person will eventually lead to pain. Because of that expectation, even genuine affection can have difficulty reaching them. It can feel like offering warmth to someone who has spent years standing behind a locked door. You can offer care, understanding, patience, and affection, yet still feel as though very little gets through. That does not mean what you offer has no value. It means their defenses may be stronger than their ability to receive what is being offered. Over time, they can become extremely skilled at maintaining an emotionally protected exterior. The version most people encounter may be friendly but guarded, caring but restrained, engaging but difficult to truly know. You may sense that there is something much deeper beneath the surface, yet every attempt to reach it seems to meet another layer of distance. Naturally, that experience can make you turn inward and question yourself. Was I not important enough? Did I do something wrong? Why could they open up to others but not to me? But the central issue is often not whether you were special enough. The more important question is whether the relationship felt emotionally safe enough for their defenses to relax. Safety is often what allows hidden parts of an avoidant person to emerge. Without it, they may continue protecting themselves regardless of how much affection someone offers. And this creates another painful cycle. When someone senses emotional distance, they naturally want to close that distance. They ask more questions, they seek reassurance, they try to communicate more frequently, they want clarity.